Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into something that feels straight out of a thriller, but it is 100% real. We're tracking a modern medical mystery, a completely invisible killer that somehow boarded an isolated ship and just started picking off healthy passengers one by one. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this timeline because it's wild. Picture this. It's April 1st, 2026. A cruise ship leaves Ushuaia, Argentina. We've got about 150 passengers and crew from 23 different countries, all expecting this absolute dream trip to Antarctica. But just 10 days later, April 11th, a 70-year-old Dutch passenger is dead. What started as a mild fever just rapidly turned into total respiratory failure. And it doesn't stop there. 2 weeks later, his widow collapses in a South African airport. She dies on April 26th. By May 2nd, yet another passenger has died, and things are so bad, the World Health Organization literally has to step in.
Think about the sheer terror of this scenario for a second. You are essentially trapped in a locked room, right? A ship floating in the middle of the ocean. Perfectly healthy people from all over the world are just suddenly spiking fevers, gasping for breath, and collapsing. So what invisible threat was systematically stalking the passengers of this isolated ship? Medical experts were absolutely racing against the clock to figure it out. Well, the test results finally came back, and the diagnosis was chilling. It was Hantavirus. Now, this isn't just your run-of-the-mill bug. It's an entire family of terrifying viruses primarily carried by rodents. And here's the truly sobering reality. There is absolutely zero FDA-approved vaccine for this. No proven antiviral cure either. If you catch it, modern medicine can really only offer supportive care, basically just trying to keep you breathing while your own immune system fights this desperate, uphill battle to save your life. And the stakes of that battle? 50%. Just let that number sink in for a moment. 50%. This virus carries a devastating mortality rate of up to 50%. It is an extraordinarily lethal pathogen. It's essentially a coin flip on the life of anyone it manages to infect. So, Section 2, the biology of the threat and exactly how it attacks. Now, what's really interesting here is the microscopic warfare happening inside the body, and it actually has these distinct geographical signatures. If you happen to catch this virus in Asia or Europe, it typically shows up as HFRS, which means it attacks your kidneys and causes massive internal bleeding. Brutal, right? But if you're in the Americas, it causes HPS, and this is exactly what hit our cruise ship passengers. Their lungs rapidly filled with fluid, effectively causing them to suffocate from the inside out. All right, moving on to Section 3, 70 Years of Outbreaks, a Historical Trail. Because you see, this cruise ship crisis didn't just happen in a vacuum. The modern medical world first bumped into this nightmare back in the 1950s, when over 3,000 American soldiers mysteriously got sick during the Korean War, with a 15% mortality rate back then. It actually took decades to figure out what it was, until Dr. Ho-Wang Lee finally isolated it in 1980, naming it after the Hantan River. But the real shocker? That happened in May 1993, right in the American Southwest. All of a sudden, young, completely healthy people were dying with a staggering initial mortality rate of 75%. Scientists were completely and utterly baffled. And this brilliantly illustrates the incredible power of indigenous knowledge. Because when modern science basically hit a brick wall in 93, it was the Navajo tribal elders who actually held the key. Their oral history documented that heavy El Niño rains would bring a massive bloom of piñon nuts. And that huge food supply? It triggered an absolute explosion in the local mouse population. More mice simply meant more virus particles being shed into the environment, perfectly explaining that sudden, deadly surge. But it's crucial to understand that we aren't just talking about an American or European problem here. Nope, this thing leaves a global footprint. Studies done between 2005 and 2008 in Vellore, India, found hantavirus antibodies in warehouse workers, in the rat-catching members of the Urla tribe, and, get this, even in 4% of the general population. So yeah, this proves the virus has a very quiet, pervasive, and truly worldwide presence. Which brings us to Section 4, the genetic twist, or basically when the rules change. Let's pivot back to our cruise ship for a second. If standard hantavirus strictly relies on rodents to spread, how on earth did it tear through an isolated ship in the middle of the ocean? Well, here is our massive plot twist. The culprit was a biological anomaly, a mutated, incredibly dangerous strain known as the Andes virus. First documented in Argentina back in 1996, this specific variant completely rewrites the biological rulebook. It has this unique, terrifying ability to transmit directly from human to human. So, the crucial point is that unlike standard Hantavirus, the Andes strain actually jumps between people. But thankfully, there's a catch. It requires prolonged, really intimate physical contact. We're talking about sharing a bed or a caregiver being exposed to bodily fluids. It's not just a casual cough in the hallway. The data also shows us that some infected individuals can act as superspreaders, passing the virus to an unusually high number of their close contacts. And putting all these pieces together finally solves our ghost ship mystery. Before that ship ever left Argentina, our first victims, that Dutch couple, took a bird-watching tour in Ushuaia, and their path? It led them right through a rat-infested landfill. They breathed in the virus from rodent droppings, and then they immediately boarded the cruise ship. Because they boarded right away, they carried that active Andes strain directly into the closed, tight quarters of the liner, completely unknowingly setting off this deadly chain reaction among their fellow passengers.
Okay, let's talk about where we go from here in Section 5, Pandemic Risk and Practical Prevention.
Now, I know, staring down the barrel of a 50% mortality rate is enough to spike anyone's anxiety. But take a deep breath, because here's why a global pandemic of this is highly, highly unlikely. Yes, the mortality rate is devastating, absolutely, but the mechanics of how it spreads, they're actually really weak. It's not airborne across a room like COVID or the flu. It demands that intimate, prolonged human contact we just talked about. And most critically, the transmission window, the actual time a person is contagious, is exceptionally short. We're talking roughly just one single day. And that tiny window makes rapid, uncontrolled global spread practically impossible. However, while a massive human-to-human pandemic isn't really on the bingo card, our baseline environmental threat is definitely shifting. Experts are actively warning that impending El Niño weather patterns are going to dramatically alter our climate. And just like those Navajo elders observed back in '93, these extreme weather shifts pose a severe risk of absolutely skyrocketing the global rodent population, which inherently brings this virus right back to our doorsteps. So, since there isn't a magical cure, awareness and rigorous hygiene are literally your only true weapons here. Let's look at some actionable defenses. First, empower yourself by sealing up any structural gaps in your home. Don't let the mice in to begin with. Second, if you are cleaning out a dusty shed, a storage unit, or any closed space where rodents might have been hanging out, always wear an N95 mask and gloves. And finally, strictly manage your food storage and garbage so you aren't laying out a welcome mat for these little carriers. You know, at the end of the day, the story of the ghost ship isn't just about one single virus. It's a profound, kind of terrifying lesson on exactly how closely our lives are tethered to the natural world. As climate shifts fundamentally alter global weather patterns, and as human expansion pushes us deeper and deeper into these untouched wild habitats, what other silent threats are waiting in the dark? Think about that. Stay curious, and thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today.